Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we're continuing our ongoing coverage of the Russian-Ukrainian war. And today, I want to start off the episode in talking about danger. And that danger, obviously, is escalation. If we go back to even times during the Cold War, I don't think we've ever existed in a more dangerous period for both sides, for Russia, for the United States, for Western European powers as well. You can see right now there is a clear alliance forming between the Russian Federation, China, and North Korea, Iran. There continues to be fighting taking place in Syria, where Iranian-backed militants and quite possibly elements of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard have attacked U.S. targets inside of Syria. We are hearing talk and discussion about the possibility of North Korean soldiers being deployed to assist Russia in this ongoing war. Now, is how much truth there is to that, it's difficult to ascertain at this moment, but there has been talk of anywhere from 25 to 50,000 North Korean troops being deployed to assist Russian forces. And then obviously the support that NATO and the United States is handing over to the Ukrainians. Outside of fighter aircraft, F-16s, possibly Mirage 2000s, other systems that could be handed over to the Ukrainians. We've not yet seen that, but I would say we may not be too far off from that happening. We have reports now that the Ukrainians have used the HIMARS launched small diameter bomb to hit targets deep inside of Russian-held territories, to include renewed attacks in Crimea, against targets in the Crimea. That is going to lead to a new Russian response, which will probably be large cruise missile strikes across Ukraine. Now, at some point, Russia is going to attempt to stop the inflow of weapons. It is just going to happen. And is that going to be a strike very close to the border on the Ukrainian side? Could there be a miss in a strike that occurs inside of Poland? It's difficult to say. But the world is a tinderbox right now, running from China to Taiwan to what's happening in Syria with the Iranians. And all these forces taking the position that the United States and its partners are a threat to their very existence. And that is what's leading to this enhanced and very much dangerous environment that we are seeing as of today. And again, new reports coming out that the North Koreans may send troops. Difficult to say. Obviously, I do believe that both the Chinese and North Koreans may have supplied the Russians with various instruments of war, namely munitions and ammunition for heavy artillery. The Russians are burning through vast amounts of heavy artillery in this war, as are the Ukrainians. Right now, the Ukrainians are very much dependent upon the United States and Western powers to now deliver both Eastern stockpiles and Eastern ammunition that will work with their 122, 152 millimeter guns. At the same time, they have now dozens of U.S. and Western European powers 155 millimeter artillery tubes as well. And those systems are going to continue to have to be supplied. And then again, the question is, what's next? What will the West hand over to the Ukrainians next? And at what point do the Russians say, enough is enough? And again, going into this conflict, I don't think anyone really foresaw where we're at now in terms of the types and the amounts of weapons that were handed over. It was a slow burn. It wasn't an immediate response. It first started with the javelins and stingers, and then it went to the stingers, and then it has really gone all over the spectrum at this point in terms of weapon systems that have been turned over to the Ukrainians. Now, is it going to help the Ukrainians in the long run, or is it going to keep the war going? Well, obviously, it is going to keep the war going, and the war is going to continue. And at this point, again, as I've talked about many times, I don't see how the Russians can stop. Meaning we, the West, have put the Russians in a position where they have to continue. If the Russians even stop now, or even if the Ukrainian side accepts the status quo, the Russians are very, very apparent and are very, very aware that the Ukrainians would rapidly expand its capabilities, and the Russians would perceive that as a de facto member of NATO, existing not too far from Moscow, just a several hundred kilometers, a few hundred kilometers from Moscow. And again, if you think back to World War II, if you look at Russian history, the Russians are simply not going to tolerate that. And they're going to continue this war until they perceive their war goals have been met. And if that takes 3 years, if that takes 5 years, at this point, I believe the Russians are willing to continue to go this military route. And compounding that, what is going to happen in the summer? Obviously, we see the pockets near Seversk. We have the pockets near Bakhmut. And then obviously down to further to the south, we have activity around Avdiivka as well. So it's difficult to say what the days and weeks will bring. Obviously, we anticipate a much greater tempo of activity by the Russians in the coming weeks and months. I would look towards August for a quite possibly a major Russian operation against Ukrainian forces. I've talked about it before, and I'll continue to discuss the buildup that is occurring to the northwest of Lysychansk and north of Seversk. This would indicate that Russia is preparing something fairly large in this area. But at the same time, you have to understand that it is possible that we could see Russian activities elsewhere too, to include areas near Kharkov. I still believe this is a prime war goal, war aim of the Russian Federation to seize control of Kharkov. And ultimately, at this point, I think the most limited objective for the Russians would be all territory east of the Dnieper River at this point. And quite possibly further, depending on how the war continues to escalate and how it continues to ratchet up in terms of violence. And it is an incredibly violent war. So we will continue to coverage. Thank you for joining us today. More to come very, very soon. Have a good day.